Hi, everyone. Welcome back to the show. Today, I'm super excited to have with me James Lupton. James is our CTO here at Cynozure. And I happen to have known James for a very long time. We've worked together since his early career coming out of university, worked with me, and we worked together in a number of organizations since then, and joined Cynozure in our early years as well to come and help shape and grow the business. James, really pleased to have you on the show. I'm hoping I learned something from this as well as the listeners. So welcome on, and looking forward to talking.
Yeah, brilliant. Thank you for having me.
No worries. And so we wanted to talk about technology and architecture trends, but more sort of forward-looking, the things that are helping to shape and define the next generation of data platforms and data solutions. Before we do that, why don't you tell everyone a little bit more about you, your role here at Cynozure, and a bit about your background?
Sure. So as you said, we've worked together for a long time now. And for me, that has always been in data, starting out originally in consultancy, in development roles, doing ETL development, building what were Microsoft BI data warehouses back in the day, before moving into the sort of solution architecture side of things and taking on roles designing platforms. Having then done the consultancy thing for a few years, went to Marks and Spencer, which was a fantastic learning opportunity. Spent about 3.5 or so years there, building out the big data platform that was working with Cloudera, big on-premise Hadoop deployment. Got to work on the loyalty program and touch all aspects of the business, before ultimately coming over to Cynozure, where now my focus is really around the technologies, tools, architectures, helping our customers build fantastic data platforms that enable their strategies and their business objectives, basically.
Cool. I always wondered what you did hanging around here. Yeah. So that's good for me as well. So cool. Well, let's get into this then. So the industry is full of buzzwords. The industry is full of new trends all the time. There's a bit of, I think, inertia in the industry, in organizations I talk to about this next trend and this next thing, and sort of, oh God, how do I keep up with all this stuff? You are the master at demystifying this stuff. So let's talk through. I really like your view of the important trends that are genuinely impactful and the ones that people should really care about and think about and start having a sort of decent plan around, and the things that are genuinely going to change the way people do things. So yeah, what are some of those trends that we're seeing in the market?
Yeah, it's a great time to be talking about this kind of thing, because I do think the industry as a whole is at somewhat of an inflection point and starting to see the maturity of some of the things like modern data platforms and some of the topics that have been over the last maybe year or two, and is starting to look ahead to some new interesting problems that we've never seen and tackled before. I often, when I'm talking at conferences and events, and I'm talking about these kind of technical topics, speak to customers about how intimidating a landscape it can be going out there onto the floor, especially if you are new to the industry, starting out. Maybe you're trying to pick what tools you're going to deploy your data platform in, and you are met with a sea of products that are telling you, we speed up your time to value. We are an all-in-one analytics shop, and you're kind of going, well, I don't understand what it is that you actually do. Are you a database? Are you a methodology that you're selling? Are you a new ETL tool? Like, what is it that you are actually selling? Behind those vendors, though, there are some kind of new emerging trends that I think I'm quite excited about, and some of which I think everyone will be doing in a year or two's time. And you can't say that for a lot of trends. I think actually I tend to be a skeptic about a lot of things. It takes quite a lot of convincing for me to be bought into changes, because a lot of things are just old ideas wearing a new hat and don't necessarily change the game, or just a means and a method for perhaps a vendor to try and sell their product and market it in a different way. So I think one of the in many ways, one of the simplest trends we're going to see over the next year is, and there's actually sort of two sides to this. One is for the larger vendors, consolidation. So I think Databricks and Snowflake are a brilliant example of this. Core parts of a modern data platform, incredibly popular choices when you're looking for your sort of central data stores and processing engines. And when you had Snowflake originally starting out in building modern data warehouses, very much around structured data, tables, columns, people who were coming from, SQL Server on-premise into the cloud and wanted easy, scalable solutions. And then you had Databricks sort of starting at the opposite end about unstructured data, about machine learning and data science kind of workloads. And what we're now seeing is Snowflake pushing towards data lakes and unstructured data. They've got features out in beta at the moment to support that. And likewise, Databricks pushing into more traditional warehouse loads, bringing SQL, the data lakehouse kind of mindset, and actually recently putting out a paper calling out some pretty punchy numbers for performance and how effective they are at those common kind of data workloads that many organizations will be dealing with. Right. So suddenly you're going to be in a place where you can actually pick a pretty limited number of vendors and cover most of your workload that you're ever going to need to do, certainly for the average organization out there.
Right.
The flip side to that, though, is that for new vendors in the market trying to build their business, they're kind of going hyper niche. So their maturity, and if we think of it like an 80-20 rule, 80% of what everyone needs to do, ingest data, store it, transform it, present it, all that usual stuff, is now pretty easy and dealt with by a handful of popular tools. What we're then going to see is the emergence of niche players who focus on specific topics. Maybe that's like data observability, maybe that's data ops, maybe that's around data cataloging and data management, all these kind of things. And even within some of those topics, narrowing down even
break that down more
further.
Yeah.
And that's only going to make it more complicated. So on the one hand, things are going to get easier in many ways to pick tools because the market's focusing around a few common architectural paradigms that work and are going to be good for most people. On the other hand, you're going to have this emergence then of all these niche players with hyper-specialized tooling that as you mature, and obviously we talk to customers about a level up framework and the journey that people go on towards the top end of that journey as you're trying to accelerate and optimize what you're doing. That's where those niche players are going to sit really well, because that you're going to be past the common problems and trying to be like, we deal with this really specific thing.
Yes, and I guess this is quite a common sort of cycle, really. You've got, niche players that become mainstream that then do more, consolidate their tools and their technologies and broaden out what they do, so they're less niche and more mainstream for almost one-stop shop, hate the phrase. And then at the same time, you've got the ones that are coming out, as you say, to be a little bit more niche and focused, and the cycle continues. So that's not unusual at the sort of macro trend level, isn't it? But I think that point about some of those that were niche and new and exciting and growing are now mainstream, and they're really kind of enabling you to do that kind of end-to-end thing that you need to do when it comes to sort of building out your data ecosystem.
Absolutely. I mean, you don't have to look far back for someone like Databricks to have been, hot young thing on the market that was, untried and untested. And now it's a Goliath in terms of platforms and tooling choices for people.
Yeah. Brilliant. Cool. So what else? What are some of the other trends then that are sort of top of mind?
So what I think is probably going to be the defining trend of the next probably couple of years, and is being positioned by many in the industry as what is going to become one of the next fundamental pieces of the modern data platform, is semantic layers or metric stores or headless BI. It's going by a few different names at the moment. And this one took me a while to wrap my head around. I've been doing data warehousing, building data platform for many years now. And on first glance, what it looked like to me was the same old thing that we used to have in on-premise data warehouse solutions. So I was kind of going, oh, is this just, is this just the market reinventing things like business objects universes and analysis services cubes and so on? But actually, when you really peel it back, it's a lot more than that. So if we kind of start with actually what is a semantic layer, what problem is it trying to solve? Fundamentally, it is trying to deal with the most common problem, which is team A and team B don't agree on what the number for sales is. And that's because they've both used slightly different definitions, or maybe gone to a slightly different table or data store to get that number. I'm looking in Salesforce, you're looking in the data warehouse, and we're 10K out on sales. I think we can point to a number of customers where there's at least 5 or 6 different versions of the sales figure floating around, depending on who you ask.
Sure.
Now that's happened because of where the definition for metrics has started to be created. It's been created in the BI tools. And with the explosion of cloud and the ease of availability in large organizations in particular, you may end up with multiple BI tools. It's not uncommon to see Power BI and Tableau and another tool in the mix in play. And even then, even if you just use one tool, often it's the case that people are defining that metric for each report or dashboard, whatever they're building. So you are walking into trouble because the moment you try and change the definition, it starts to break. Now, when I originally came at this, I was like, well, I've always approached it as define those logics and define that metric down at the data warehouse level. So you're doing it once so that people consume from that central place. But actually, when you start to pick it out, the point that is being made with the metrics store, the problem they're trying to solve, says in a data warehouse, you've either got, let's say, your facts dimensions, but whether or not you've used a Kimball model or whatever, you've got your cleaned up tables, and there'll be a low granularity. And you've got your roll up aggregated tables. That might be active users, and you've got a day, week, month, year in there. But the problem is that the way people want to cut and ask questions isn't something that you can prepare every scenario for.
And indeed, you might not want to or need to, because your fictitious scenarios that you can come up with, is that a good investment of time, or do you do that at the point of needing it instead?
Exactly. You could spend hours trying to create every combination and have no one ever use it. And that's where BI tools came in with drag and drop interfaces to try and solve that problem. And they did, but they
very well
caused this other one that we've just described. So the problem statement is then, well, how do we allow people with that self-service mindset? And self-service people typically just want to know KPIs cut by various different dimensions and filters. But I saw it described in an article as like doing Mad Libs, where you've kind of got like, I want to know sales by region filtered to the last 12 months. And you're changing in those terms. And the bridge that we've got to create there is say, well, how do you take that kind of question and turn that into a consistent query that will generate you the same results every time, and be able to do that on the fly? So not having pre-built the answer exactly that way. And that's where the metric store kind of comes in. Semantic layer, headless BI, again, lots of different names that we haven't kind of as an industry agreed upon yet. That is there to allow you to take those kind of questions, have a common configuration and definition that can take that kind of request and turn it into SQL or whatever behind the scenes, and go and run that query and get you the answer. So there are tools that sort of do elements of this right now, but nothing that's actually kind of real time enough, and that's doing that stuff on the fly in a completely consistent way in a single place. And that's where the semantic layer comes in. So I think a great place to, if you want to read a bit more about this, is go have a look at DBT's recent funding announcement. So with the 200+ million they've secured, big amount of their focus there is going to be building out this metric store capability, because DBT is quite well positioned for that. It's a well adopted tool, and it's already got great capabilities for transforming data and doing that in a really configuration driven way and so on. Right. But it's not something that can run on demand. It's I can't ask it to get me something and get it to immediately run. So that's likely where we'll see the evolution of that tool to fill this gap. I'm really interested.
So it feels like that kind of sits between, like, because as you say, a lot of that is catered for in some way in lots of different components of a sort of an architecture. But is this something that's essentially sits between your core data store, your data platform, your data warehouse, and your end user business intelligence analytics tools? Right.
Exactly. That's how people are drawing the picture at the moment. Right. In fact, that DBT article I mentioned had a really powerful, very simple, but very powerful picture in it, which showed here's the current model data stack, which basically said sources, database, transformation tools, things accessing it. Yep. It said we are putting in another layer here, and that sits between that database, data warehouse element of it, and the things accessing it.
Right.
So to add a fifth box onto a 4-box picture that describes a data platform, that was really articulate way to actually get across the scale of change that this is going to mean for data platforms.
And of course the kind of the roll your eyes moment is, do we really want another layer another tool to manage, another layer to manage, another hop of data to manage, another place to coordinate and manage definitions? But actually what this is trying to do is clean up the challenge that not having that layer has produced, which is, as you say, multiple definitions and lack of reusability and those good things. Okay.
I'm also really interested just to see the knock-on impact of that with tools like ThoughtSpot, who work on text-based questions. We've all been trained on Google. We all know how to ask a question in text. And while drag and drop GUI interfaces, whatever, have been the norm for a long time in the industry, actually, it's much quicker if I can just go in and be like, what were the sales for this region last year? As a typed sentence, and it can translate that into common metrics. I think this semantic layer, this metric store approach, we'll see how it actually evolves because it's still early days, could really supercharge those kind of tools and actually start to bring semantic natural language querying into the mainstream in a way that it perhaps hasn't been yet.
Okay, great. Okay, well, that's good one for people to get their heads around to get moving. So let's have a hear about some another trend.
Yeah, so I think the next one is active metadata stroke next generation data catalogues. And the best way to describe this is it's easiest to think about what the vast majority of people and the vast majority of tools do right now as passive metadata. So we collect metadata and we store it somewhere, and I might look at it. That might be descriptions of data to help me understand what it is and when it was last refreshed and the quality of it. But I, as a human, am going and I'm looking at it to provide myself some context as to what I'm doing and so forth. Active metadata then, as you might expect, is saying, well, actually, can't we drive automation and events on that metadata as well? Why have it simply just be a knowledge repository kind of thing? So, for example, there's a few workloads that might use this kind of thing. Data quality is a good example. So why not, with active metadata, say, well, as my data pipelines are moving along from source downwards to its eventual end resting place, I'll do my data quality checks. Okay, cool, we do that all now. But rather than just log the data quality score in my data quality tool or catalog or wherever I'm putting it, if that score is low, then take some action, whatever that action is. That might be about contacting someone. It might be that there's a remedial process that can be run that's automated. It might be that data is put into a different location and held in quarantine until it can make it further down. Or the positive flip side to that, if it's good data quality, then I'm allowed to follow up and take an action of like send it to my marketing platform to trigger an email campaign or whatever it is.
Right.
So privacy policy side of things, for example, where I can check my data as it's coming in to be like, does this contain sensitive personal information? If it does, don't just record that this is GDPR sensitive data in my catalog. Apply a security policy on that data set that limits and restricts access in line with whatever policies I've got in place, especially as that might be data that's arriving perhaps for the first time in my platform that doesn't necessarily have those controls configured for it because it's come in. So actually trying to use metadata to more proactively manage data in your platform is where that world is shifting. So that's going to be probably more for the data teams and data management, data governance, functions in organizations to help automate and manage workflows. But there's also going to be business applications to that as well in terms of triggering events and driving higher quality of outputs from these platforms.
Yes, which whilst the users and the usage of the platform may be within a certain team, the outcome you're trying to achieve here is better quality data and lower cost of doing all these things, and better outcome of rules and models and applications. So the end result is a better data ecosystem that produces good results. So
exactly.
The users sort of buy the buy in that sense from the trend perspective. So cool. Okay, that's I think that's a kind of, I think those sort of quite different trends, aren't they, that those two talk about? The semantic layer is kind of real sort of sharp end business user, defining metrics, reusability, make sure people get the same answers, and this is kind of at the kind of real granular, as you say, metadata level of a data platform to make sure that what ends up in those applications, in those reports, is good and correct and arrives on time and those good things.
I mean, it's interesting. I think the common theme in many ways for both of those is a data management problem. And we've certainly seen the number of clients approaching us with data management use cases and problem statements has increased over the last year. I think that's perhaps symptomatic of some of the outcome of COVID-19, in that we saw a lot of organizations actually invest in data during that time and realize the value. Some of them probably moved quite fast and then are now feeling the pain of not having put that governance and management in place from the start and going, oh, we need to course correct.
Yeah, for sure.
So I think the last one then for me in this space, although there's of course probably many more trends out there, is reverse ETL. Now this isn't really a new thing, whereas I think something like metric stores, that seems to be a genuinely new idea when you actually get to the core of it. Reverse ETL is not a new thing. It's been around for like a long time, but it's seeing a real re-emergence now, and I think driven by a couple of things. One is the sophistication of businesses. So reverse ETL, take data out of my data platform and put it back into my operational systems to drive some function and operation. And that's being driven by the sophistication and increasing maturity of organizations as a whole with data and how they want to use it, moving beyond, I want a report that tells me how I did yesterday, to I want to activate a segmentation campaign in my marketing platform to target customers based on recommendations that are built on past purchasing behaviors, for example.
Right.
And people are now demanding that more sophisticated use and execution of data, and quite often that means putting that data back into operational systems, into the hands of frontline teams who are actually, delivering whatever it is the business does, so they can be more effective. it's not to say, reports, insights, analytics is done or has even sort of reached maturity, but it's just you've sort of now got this parallel demand coming up as well. And the second thing there is we're seeing the emergence of tools specifically aimed at that integration. So much like we had at the start of the stack over the last few years, things like Fivetran and Stitch and so on emerge that have pre-built connectors to common services, the Salesforces, the Marketos, .digitals of the world, and getting that data down into your platform really easily. It's the reverse of that says, well, we know how to put data back into Salesforce if you want to update a contact or if you want to trigger a campaign or whatever it is.
Yeah,
I think probably what we'll see feels like a no-brainer for the normal stock of ETL tools to extend and enhance their functionality
to make it easier to push it back out. Yeah. I mean, it's as you say, this one feels like a trend in terms of organizations wanting to do it rather than any particular new technology necessarily needed to make it happen. It's a trend of, as you say, wanting to get the output of analytics and output of whatever your data platform's done into the part of the technology in the organization that does the operations, your supply chain tool, your marketing tool, your finance system, your people management platform, and so to make them smarter, get the analytics into them. So I think I remember a debate on LinkedIn about this one, and it felt closed loop ETL was sort of maybe a better phrase or something, but it's just it is taking it back and putting it back into the hands of the applications that people use day to day. I guess the good outcome of that actually is, in theory, a slightly less number of tools that are a normal operational business user needs to touch, because it's sort of done for them, and then it might remove the need for sort of needing to do analytics locally in order to then do something else, in order to then make a change in how the business operates. This is sort of like a little bit more automated and reusable across the organization.
Exactly. I mean, I was yesterday I was listening to your podcast with Sam Herbert from over Cynozure, and one of the points he was making was, when you are in organizations that are grown by acquisition, you end up with many ERP systems, and most people's natural instinct is consolidate. We need this all in, one SAP system or whatever. But actually, he's a skeptic on why do you need to do that, and there are not other ways to do it. And I think reverse ETL is actually a way that says, well, if you are in a situation where you've got 5 ERP systems, could you not actually say, well, they each serve a function, they're each customized for their local region and the purpose that they were originally built for, but we do want to share data between them to do various things. And that's where something like reverse ETL can come in, that you are pulling data from all of them into a central place, you're doing some stuff to it, and then you're sending it back out to those systems for whatever purpose that you're trying to drive.
Well, it feels like some combination of these there's a couple of these new trends, right? There's the integration between applications, and then there's integration with a data platform and maybe a semantic layer. That combination, maybe it reduces the need to kind of consolidate your source applications to one, but that will be certainly specific to each organization and the needs that they have. What's just interesting and across all those trends, is there, who's driving the innovation, right? So there's as you mentioned before, there's vendors that are entering the market, and normally a new entrant into the market is finding a gap, they're finding a problem, and they're helping to solve that problem. So it's almost vendor-driven innovation, but from customer needs, whether they get it or not. Is this kind of a pull from customers going, we've got these problems, please someone help solve them, and then someone's picking up the mantle? Is it organizations themselves, building tools and technologies and solving these problems? Like, where is it a bit of all of that? Where's this kind of innovation happening? Because I know, as I said before, sort of you can get a bit rolly-eyed about new buzzwords and new trends and new themes, but they normally come from something and somewhere, and obviously depending on where that comes from changes how real they are, how genuine they are. So where's some of that coming from?
Yeah, so I mean, it'd be easy to sit on the fence here and say it's a bit of both things, but the way I see it is, this is the industry following its customers. And I say that because what I think has emerged is a trend towards decentralization of data. And particularly in larger organizations. I think small organizations, it's much easier to have a central place. It's normally just because of lack of skills and headcounts. But actually, the people who are spending the most money on data, and therefore the ones that the industry are going to be most likely chasing after, what we've seen there is an inevitable just drift back to saying, well, the marketing team care about marketing stuff and they're not being prioritized, or it's not moving fast enough for them. And actually, cloud makes it really easy to go and get and set up tools to do stuff. Skills are out there in the market, and we want our own headcount to do our own analysis and problem statements. And you see this emergence of domain, business vertical aligned teams of data emerging, which is almost, for a long time, the industry has been trying to build central data platforms, central data teams. That's kind of been the direction of travel. And I almost see this as like it's the body rejecting the transplant kind of thing. It's not actually how large organizations work. Large organizations are, by their nature, sort of semi-autonomous cells with specific focuses and problems that they have to solve.
Even if that's not by design, that's just happened because they're large. Certainly, small and medium, and a slightly more startup way of building yourself is like that. It's squads of people focused on a part of the business journey, customer journey, stakeholder journey that their business operates in. So this kind of, I wonder if that is driving some of the innovation, just the way organizations are setting themselves up in this slightly more autonomous, focused way, rather than very functional, marketing team, HR team, finance team. It's much more about, well, here we're the team to solve this customer challenge, and that's how we're going to set ourselves up. So maybe some of this comes from the need to interact with people in a slightly different way.
I think all of those things coming together have then led to the industry as a whole going, on the one hand, large organizations have naturally kind of gone into domain-specific teams and then distributed data teams across the business. And as you say, newer, more purposeful organizations when it comes to data are actually building data product-based squads who are focusing on specific problems for the business. So on both aspects, you've got this move towards actually a split. And the industry's reacted by saying, okay, well, that causes some problems, doesn't it? Because you've got maybe 5 major departments all with their own data team and perhaps even platforms and technology. And guess what? Back to our semantic layers, they've all got different definitions for what a customer is, a sale is, a active user is, or whatever. So suddenly something like a semantic layer that says, I know you want to be doing your own thing, but we need to have common definitions across the organization. So we need to be able to solve that problem. You look at something like active metadata. That's going to be one of the ways in which we can better govern this distributed place. My example of like personal information. Well, how do we make sure whatever the sales team are doing, the marketing team are doing, and ops team are doing is staying compliant with the rules we have in our organization? Well, let's automate that. Let's make that AI/ML driven and trigger certain events in certain scenarios. And some of this has been perhaps then best summarized by concepts like data mesh emerging. Saying a data mesh is a reflection of, well, actually, we are naturally moving to distributed teams. And I don't necessarily agree with the central premise of data mesh that monolithic central data platforms and data warehouses have failed. I think plenty of people have failed doing them, but I don't think they're doomed and destined to fail by default. But that actually building distributed teams, distributed domains that have the expertise and knowledge about their part of the business and the data and what they're trying to solve is an effective way to do it. That brings in that data product thinking. Also says we need things like federated data governance. So how do we maintain consistent records and documentation and so on? So a lot of these themes just start to come together to say, actually, the industry is chasing the decentralization of data teams and data platforms and trying to make sure that the shortcomings that will generate, like conflicting definitions, poor governance, poor access, and so on, are effectively dealt with and don't become a problem that sees us in 5 years' time contracting back to,
I guess, also
data platforms.
Yeah, and I guess also it makes it, in theory, more modular in the way it's structured. The architecture is structured, the tools are structured in that. I think the sort of back to that monolithic thing, part of the challenge there was one big Uber kind of platform with one technology, and you're sort of tied to the vendor, you're tied to using it, you're tied to the skills needed for it. Whereas, and this is obviously a strategic choice, but this kind of could allow you to be able to couple and decouple different parts of your data architecture to make sure that it was serving the purpose, and it doesn't need to be consistent across the organization. It just needs to be the right choice. But yeah, does it allow that sort of more modular? Because I know you and I talk a lot about sort of how do you build an adaptable platform, and part of adaptability comes from reusability, but it comes from modular and being able to sort of add to the platform in a consistent way. And I think that decentralized thing requires you to have it that way. Otherwise, you just bolt on and create a mess.
So I think definitely requires you to bring a modular mindset to how you approach building your data platforms. And the thing is, I think we always advise people that is one of the key mindsets to have in place when approaching a platform. I don't think that's actually a mindset that doesn't apply to a central data platform. Even if you're building a sort of single central thing, well, you should still be approaching that with a modular mindset, because you might want to rip out the ETL tool or the database or put something new on. Same problem, bigger scale and more challenge there. I think probably the difference being that you are more likely to see a greater variety of tools in your stack if you're a decentralized team, because you've got different budgets and different decision makers in the mix.
And the governance model around it might allow for people to make some of their own decisions about what's right for them in their geography or their business unit.
Exactly.
That works best.
And if they've got the skills, if it's actually driving value, then why not do it? But I think that comes back to that, having really strong core data management approaches that say, absolutely, you can do that, but that doesn't mean you can have a different definition of sales, or there are some core standards that you need to comply with in order to maintain the integrity of the whole. That's, I think, going to be, which is where in data mesh thinking, that sort of federated data governance element comes in, that says, sure, you can do your own thing, but there are some rules you have to play by if you're going to do that.
Yeah, which is sensible, grown up way of managing data these days. So listen, this has been it's been great. I all those terms for me were I sort of, you and I sort of bit of chat about them, but you've unpicked them really well for me, and I hope for everyone else too. There's of course a lot of trends that are sort of still in flight that might not go away. So I think this is some additional sort of thoughts and ideals and frameworks and trends for people to get their head around. Is there anything, I suppose, just to sort of finish out, is there anything you think that is sort of done with? Is this sort of one trend in, one trend out? Is this a whole bunch of new things that people need to get their head around, or actually is there some stuff that's sort of either not quite panned out or just to sort of run its course, and these things are kind of starting to take over?
Yeah, it's I think there's definitely some things that, what's the best way to describe it, have in some ways reached maturity, and therefore, or not even maturity, that's not even quite the right, that they, if we think, I suppose, of what is it, the Gartner
cycle
curve, they are over the hype, they're probably coming down into the bottom, and are going to, in the next year or two, actually reach that plateau of productivity and start to become really useful. So things like data ops, that's, I think, still a really important and fundamental mindset and set of technical capabilities that go with it. But it's now, I now don't go into many places where there isn't an expectation that they should probably be doing that stuff, and that is just a good core part of best practice.
Yeah.
We're not there yet with all the tools and the ways of doing it, but it is in that place where it's like, it's now, that's an accepted thing we should be doing. And there's some bare minimum stuff, at least, that you need to take forward. So, that's, I hear less conversations about that now as like people thinking about it and should I be doing it? It's more like, okay.
I think that's a good way of summarizing on the data ops one is sort of it's become best practice. It's now the de facto. You have to, you may not do all of it or encompass all of it, but the elements and the focus and purpose around building, agile quality data products end to end using data ops. I think it's sort of like you start from day one in that mindset rather than it being something new and emerging as some of these other trends are.
And I mean, the second one, well, I don't know if this is on the way out, but this will be one interesting to watch over the next few years, because I think some of the ideas we've talked about today, semantic layers in particular, it's a year off maturity. There's going to be a lot of talk about it this year. There's going to be a lot of products coming out, and then from sort of probably in a year's time, that's when, as someone implementing a platform, you might be starting to think about putting that in place. But I guess that decentralization element, what does that spell the end of central data warehouse platforms? Are we going to stop building enterprise data models in a platform full of facts and dimension tables that are structured, that's the single place that everyone comes to, and move to a bunch of distributed models? I think it's definitely too soon to sort of signal that is dying a death yet. But if some of these trends take off, if they're implemented effectively, if people come up with the right tools and work it out, then I can definitely see at least how common you are to find central teams, central platforms, and so on diminishing, and people expecting to approach this in that more kind of decentralized fashion.
Yeah. Certainly a level of maturity required in lots of aspects to make something like that at work. But interesting. Well, great discussion, James. Thanks for coming on the show. I'm sure lots of people to get their head around there. And it'd be great to see. Let's do a review in a year or two and see how well these trends picked up and how right we got this. But really appreciate you coming on the show and chatting about all that stuff.
Brilliant. Yeah, thank you for having me. It was a great discussion.
Thanks a lot. And thanks everyone for listening. I hope you enjoyed that chat today, and we'll catch you again soon.